am not the SNP, I'm not a member of the SNP. This referendum is not about which political party you like, it's not about which political leader you like. If that was the case, who would want to stick with the UK? David Cameron? Ed Miliband? Nigel Farage? Boris Johnson coming up the rear? So, let's not make this about personalities or political parties. It's about power, it's about democracy. And most of my lifetime, I have lived in Scotland, which I do consider to be a country, and it is the natural right of a country to govern itself and to get the government, its people, as a majority, vote for every single time. But in my lifetime, for most of it, I have lived under a government in London that Scotland didn't vote for. Now, my politics are very radical. I'm a feminist, I'm a socialist, and I can probably guarantee, certainly can guarantee it in a UK Westminster context, can probably guarantee that in my lifetime, even with independence, I won't get the government that I vote for. But with independence, the majority of people in this room, in Scotland as a whole, will get the government it votes for. Now, I think that's a fundamental democratic right, and there is a complete power imbalance in terms of the setup just now. Douglas is one of 59 MPs down at Westminster, out of 650, am I right? With the power over foreign affairs, Douglas is the shadow foreign secretary, I think. Power over foreign affairs, power over trading, power over nuclear weapons, the big tax powers, the big welfare powers. Even the Parliament doesn't have the power about whether or not to go to war. That's an executive decision. And just imagine if Scotland had been independent, when millions of us were marching in the streets against the Iraq war. Do we think a government in Edinburgh that was independent would have went to war in Iraq? Douglas talks about the great benefits of the Union. But I know that most people don't really want to talk about history, but it really doesn't stack up. And some of the things that are claimed for the Union. Yes, the Attlee government post-World War II was very progressive. And by the way, it did a lot of stuff coming out of a world war when things were decimated. And yet nowadays we're told we've not got enough money for things. But the NHS that was built, the fundamentals of it were already here. The national insurance system was already here, particularly in Scotland, that pioneered the development of the NHS with the establishment of the health service of the Highlands and Islands. And municipal hospitals in big cities like Glasgow, for example, were well established towards the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So, that's my historical point. But in terms of now and the future, nobody now in their right mind claims that Scotland can do it. Even the Financial Times says we would be better off than the UK. Even agencies like Standard & Poor's say we would have a better credit rating than the UK. Even David Cameron says that we could look to the Nordic countries and it would be quite appealing for a small country like ours to have the power to aspire to be like that. And from a woman's perspective, when you look at what women have achieved in smaller countries across the world, the top 10 countries for women in the world, 9 of them have populations of less than 9 million. Iceland, with a population smaller than Edinburgh, is the top country for women in the whole world, despite its problems. Of course, that dealt with its bankers differently. Douglas talks about security and propping us up when the banks collapsed. Why did the banks collapse in the first place? Was that not under Westminster rule? Was that not under deregulation from Gordon Brown and his predecessors? We only needed bailed out because of the deregulation and the policies in the first place. But in Iceland, they didn't bail out the bankers and continue to pay them bonuses whilst putting a cap on welfare benefits. They jailed the bankers. Good. Now I think, in Scotland, with independence, what do you think we would choose? Jail your bankers, keep paying them bonuses. Jail your bankers, keep paying them bonuses. No, there's no guarantee. There's absolutely no guarantee about the government that you would get with independence. There is a difference between power and policy, and constitutions and manifestos. And it's not about the SNP in perpetuity, much as I like right. It's not about that. It is about the people actually having a point to vote. And to give the opportunity for other parties, in fact, in an independent Scotland, to have all the powers over employment legislation, for example, equal pay, to actually really make a difference to inequality for women and poorer people in Scotland. And you have to make a judgment. Is fairer employment legislation? Douglas talked about solidarity. I agree with solidarity. In fact, I've spoken at a lot of trade union meetings on independence question, and it's really quite astonishing, the shift. And I heard at Unison National Con, I'm a trade unionist, I've organised strikes, I believe in solidarity. I believe in solidarity with people across the world. It doesn't stop at the bottom of the channel. I believe in solidarity with trade unionists in Colombia, in Cuba. I believe in solidarity with women struggling underground in Afghanistan. Doesn't mean I need to be in a country with them. Why should Scotland only be allowed to organise its solidarity within the unit of the United Kingdom when we do not get the government that we vote for? And on the solidarity question, you might remember, some of you all look very young, but when the Tories got into power, that was 1979, and I lived in Castlemilk at the time. I had been born in the Gorbals and we were evicted up to Castlemilk. Dire poverty. I left school at 16, ice in the windies, one fire in the living room, went to queue in Thatcher's job queue at the job centre, and unemployed were visible then, before technology, so you had to actually queue and everybody was in the job centre. And my mother really struggled. And I assumed, though, at that age that things would get better. Now I've got two daughters in their 20s. My oldest daughter's got mental health problems. And she's really struggling. Really struggling. And she is living under the Tories' tax welfare cuts. She has the realistic prospect of having to access a food bank. I never thought that would happen to my daughters. I'm absolutely shocked and horrified. You know, and I don't like being personal, but Douglas did also vote for the benefit cap. And we've got food banks on our doorsteps. And I would never have believed that way back in 1979 as I queued in the job centre for Castlemilk that my daughters in their 20s would be facing that spectre. And so Douglas is presenting a choice. It's either independence, responsibility, control, for us to do what we do, and you have to make a judgment. Is the sort of society that you want to live in more likely with independence or staying within the United Kingdom? Women have suffered 75% of the cuts. Only 40% of them, in terms of Westminster austerity measures, have been delivered so far. There's another 60% to come. And there's really no anything from a Labour perspective that's going to make very much difference to that, Douglas. And so you have to make a judgment. likely to happen? And do you want to take control? Do you want to have the power? Or do you want to leave it to the vagaries of whatever happens in Westminster?